When you think about King Henry VIII, the default image is, the guy with 6 wives and all that drama.
For sure. But the real story, the one that completely changed England forever, wasn't about his marriages.
Right. It was a massive religious and political earthquake.
It really was. And it's funny because Henry started out as this super devout Catholic. The Pope even gave him a special title, Defender of the Faith.
Oh, Defender of the Faith. That's pretty ironic, given what happens next.
Totally. But his biggest worry, his number one priority, was getting a male heir. He was terrified of another civil war.
And his wife, Catherine of Aragon, no son. So he needed a way out, an annulment.
Which the Pope refused to give him. You have to remember, the Pope was under huge pressure from Catherine's nephew, who was the Holy Roman Emperor, a very powerful guy.
So saying no to Henry was actually the safer political move for the Pope.
It was. But Henry's reaction to being told no was, well, historic. He just decided to cut ties with Rome completely after 900 years.
And he starts his own church, the Church of England, and makes himself the boss, the supreme head.
So now, the king has all the political power and all the religious power. But running a country, fighting wars, having a fancy court, that stuff costs a lot of money.
And that brings us to the real target, the monasteries.
Exactly. This is where you see the plan take shape. Why the monasteries?
Because that's where the money was. All of it.
So much of it. We're talking about immense wealth.
Yeah.
The monasteries owned almost 1/4 of all the cultivated land in England.
1/4. Just stop and think about that. That's not just some fields. That's a huge piece of the entire country's economy.
Oh, absolutely. If you were a farmer back then, chances are you were paying your rent to a local abbey, not some lord.
So it's not just land, it's income.
It's income, and they were like these massive businesses. They produced huge amounts of wool, which was a major export. They grew crops, brewed beer. They did everything.
And what about inside the buildings?
Treasure chests. Centuries of accumulated gold, silver, jewels, all used for religious services. It was all just sitting there.
So for a king like Henry, who was spending a ton of money on his navy and defenses,
it was the perfect solution. It was a way to solve all his financial problems in one go and, boost his own power at the same time.
Okay, but you can't just walk in and say, this is all mine now. You need a plan. You need a strategy.
And for that, you need a planner. Enter Thomas Cromwell.
The architect of the whole thing.
He was. Cromwell was the king's chief minister, and his whole vision was about centralizing power. All authority should flow from the king with no interference from the Pope in Rome.
He understood that if you control the money, you control everything.
And his primary tool for this was something pretty revolutionary for the 16th century. Data.
Data.
Yeah. In 1535, he ordered this massive survey called the Valor Ecclesiasticus.
Which sounds very technical. What was it, really?
It was basically the biggest, most detailed financial audit the government had ever done. It wasn't just counting buildings, it was tracking every single penny of income.
From every church, every monastery in the entire country.
Every single one. Rents, sales, donations, everything. So instead of just guessing how rich the church was, Cromwell could now show Henry an exact number.
That's a powerful tool. It's like having a treasure map.
It is. But you can't just seize property because it's on a spreadsheet. You need a justification, a moral reason.
So he needed to make them look bad.
Exactly. So alongside the money canners, he sent out inspectors to visit all the monasteries.
And they were looking for trouble.
Pretty much. They were told to find corruption, laziness, monks not taking their duty seriously. And the reports they sent back were, let's say, exactly what the king wanted to hear.
So they were probably exaggerating things.
Oh, almost certainly. They were creating the PR campaign needed to make the closures seem necessary and, for the good of the realm.
Which set the stage for the first big move.
Right. In 1536, Parliament passes the first act of dissolution. It targeted the smaller monasteries, the ones earning less than £200 a year.
Why the small ones first?
The official reason was that they were the most corrupt. But really, it was like a test run. See how it goes, see what the reaction is.
And about 300 of them were closed down pretty fast. The monks and nuns were basically given a choice. Move to a bigger monastery or take a small payment and leave.
But this didn't go unnoticed. The public reaction, especially in the north of England, was explosive.
The Pilgrimage of Grace.
Yes. And this wasn't just a small protest. It was a massive rebellion that seriously threatened Henry's rule.
So what made people so angry? Was it just about religion?
It was a mix. Religion was a huge part of it, for sure. They were furious about the break with Rome. But it was also economic. The monasteries were the social safety net.
They helped the poor,
They
right?
provided food, medicine, shelter. For many communities, the local monastery was the only form of charity they had. When that vanished overnight, people were desperate.
So this guy, Robert Aske, he leads thousands of armed rebels.
Tens of thousands. They marched under religious banners, demanding the closures stop.
And Henry was actually scared. He didn't have a big enough army there to just crush them.
No, he didn't. So he did something very clever and very brutal. He lied, he met the rebel leaders, he listened to all their problems, and he promised he'd address them. He even offered everyone a full pardon if they just went home peacefully.
And they believed him.
They did. They were loyal to their king, they trusted him, so they broke up their army and went home.
And
then, once they were scattered, Henry broke every single promise. He had the leaders, including Robert Aske, arrested and executed for treason.
wow, that's cold.
It sent a very clear message. Any resistance would be crushed, and it gave him the green light to finish the job.
So that leads to the second wave.
The second act of dissolution in 1539. This time, they went after the big ones, the large, ancient, and incredibly wealthy monasteries.
Did they use force?
They didn't always have to. The strategy was smarter this time. They would put immense pressure on the head of the monastery, the abbot.
What kind of pressure?
It was an offer you couldn't refuse. Voluntarily. Sign over all your property to the king, and you'll get a nice pension for life.
And if you refuse?
If you refuse, you'd be accused of treason. And the penalty for treason was death. So it wasn't really a choice.
Surrender by threat.
Essentially, yes. And it worked. By 1540, it was all over. More than 800 monasteries were gone. An entire way of life that had existed for centuries was just wiped out.
And what happened to the buildings themselves? I mean, we see all these incredible ruins all over England today.
That's because the destruction was immediate and systematic. As soon as a monastery was surrendered, the king's men moved in.
And they just stripped them bare.
Everything of value. The lead from the roofs was a huge prize melted down for cannons or sold off.
What about all the art and books?
Smashed or destroyed. Beautiful stained glass windows were broken just to get the lead out. Ancient handwritten books were torn apart for their covers or just sold as scrap paper. It was a staggering cultural loss.
And the stones and wood from the buildings.
Local people were often allowed to just take it to build their own houses or barns.
Yeah.
That's why so many of these places are just empty shells today. They're like skeletons on the landscape.
It's incredible to think about. But what about the people? You mentioned the monasteries were a safety net for the poor. What happened when that was gone?
A social crisis. There was nothing to replace it. Suddenly you have this huge increase in poverty and homelessness. The roads were filled with beggars.
So the government had to step in.
Eventually, yes.
Yeah.
They had to start creating new laws, the poor laws, to deal with a problem they basically created themselves. The state broke the old system, so the state had to invent a new one.
And all that land Henry seized. He didn't keep it all, did he?
No, he needed cash and he needed it fast, so he sold off huge amounts of it to a new, rising class of people. Wealthy merchants, lawyers, local landowners. We call them the gentry.
And that changes everything, doesn't it?
Fundamentally, Henry gets his money, but he also creates this powerful group of people whose new wealth and status depends completely on him and the new Church of England.
So they're going to be fiercely loyal to him. They have a vested interest in making sure the break with Rome is permanent.
Absolutely. Power shifts away from the old church and into the hands of these new secular landowners. It really set the stage for England's future.
And what about the actual monks and nuns, the thousands of people whose homes were just taken away?
Their fates were very different. For the men, the monks, most got a small pension. Some were able to find jobs as priests in the new church or as tutors. It was a huge disruption, but they had some options.
But not for the nuns.
For the nuns, it was much, much harder. They weren't allowed to be priests, so their job options were almost zero. Many had to depend on tiny payments or go back to families that didn't want them. They really suffered the most.
Some just left the country, I imagine.
Many did. The most devout fled to Europe to try and continue their religious life in exile. For them, it was a spiritual tragedy.
So when you boil it all down, this whole thing, which started because a king wanted a son,
It ended up becoming the single biggest transfer of wealth in English history. It made the king incredibly powerful, it secured his finances, and it totally reshaped the country's social and physical landscape.
an act of personal desperation that laid the groundwork for the modern English state.
That's the long and short of it. An incredible chain of events. Good luck with your studies.